I was dared a marriage test by my wife's friends. I played recordings on speaker, exposed their toxic manipulation, and drew hard boundaries to save us. I'd come home early from work that Thursday, looking forward to a quiet evening. The house felt unusually quiet as I stepped inside, but voices drifted from the kitchen. My wife was on speakerphone, and I recognized her best friend's voice immediately. "Come on, it'll be fun. Besides, don't you want to know how secure your marriage really is?" I froze in the hallway, my briefcase still in hand. "I don't know," my wife replied, her voice carrying that tone she used when she was already convinced but wanted to seem hesitant. "What if he notices?" "That's the point. If he doesn't react, then you know he doesn't care enough. If he does react, then you'll see how possessive he really is. Either way, you win." Another voice chimed in, her other friend from their weekly coffee group. "We've all done it with our husbands. It's like a litmus test for the relationship. Plus, you get to feel desirable again." My wife laughed, and the sound made my stomach turn. "Okay, but where would I even start?" "Start small," the first friend advised. "Tomorrow night, when you two go out, just flirt with a bartender or waiter. Nothing serious, just enough to get a reaction. Then we can plan something bigger for next week." "What if he gets suspicious?" "Please, men are oblivious. Besides, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just testing the waters. Think of it as relationship research." I stood there for a full minute, processing what I'd just heard. My wife of 6 years was planning to flirt with other men because her friends had convinced her it was some kind of marriage test. The casual way they discussed it, like it was as normal as trying a new restaurant, made my blood boil. But I didn't storm into the kitchen. I didn't start yelling or demand explanations. Instead, I quietly set my briefcase down and pulled out my phone. If she wanted to play games, I'd make sure I understood all the rules first. I opened the voice recorder app and moved closer to the kitchen doorway. "So, tomorrow night at that new steakhouse?" my wife asked. "Perfect. The bartender there is cute too. Just be friendly, laugh at his jokes, maybe touch his arm when you order drinks. Classic moves. And what about him?" My wife lowered her voice slightly. "What if he says something? Then you know where you stand. Look, the strong marriages survive these little tests. The weak ones, well, at least you'll know." I'd heard enough. I backed away from the kitchen and went upstairs to our bedroom, my mind racing. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close as my wife left for her evening yoga class, or at least that's where she claimed to be going these days. Sitting on the edge of our bed, I stared at the recording on my phone. 6 years of marriage, and she was willing to risk it all because her friends thought it would be entertaining. The worst part wasn't even the planned flirting. It was how easily she'd been convinced that our relationship needed testing. I could confront her right now when she got home, demand an explanation, play the recording, start the fight that would inevitably follow. But that's exactly what they expected, wasn't it? Either I'd be the oblivious husband who noticed nothing, or the possessive one who lost his mind over a little harmless flirting. They'd forgotten about a third option, the husband who knew exactly what was happening and chose to respond strategically. I spent the rest of the evening researching the restaurant we'd be visiting tomorrow night. I looked up the staff, the layout, even made a new reservation for the exact time we'd originally planned. If my wife wanted to test our marriage, I'd give her a test she wasn't prepared for. When she came home around 9 o'clock, she was unusually cheerful, practically bouncing through the door. "How was yoga?" I asked, not looking up from my laptop. "Great. Really worked up a sweat tonight." She kissed the top of my head. "Are we still on for dinner tomorrow?" "Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it." She smiled and headed upstairs, humming to herself. I waited until I heard the shower running before opening my laptop again. If she thought this was going to be a simple test with predictable results, she was about to learn that she'd married someone far more observant than her friends gave me credit for. The game was on, but I'd be the one setting the rules. I pulled up the restaurant's website one more time, memorizing every detail. Tomorrow night would be interesting indeed. She expected either jealousy or indifference, but she was going to get something else entirely. A masterclass in how to handle disrespect with precision and style. The shower was still running upstairs. I had time to prepare for what was coming, time to think through every possible scenario and plan my responses accordingly. My wife and her friends thought they were conducting some kind of social experiment. They had no idea they were about to become the subjects of one instead. The next evening arrived with my wife spending an unusual amount of time getting ready. She changed outfits 3 times, settled on a dress that was just a bit tighter than her usual dinnerwear, and applied makeup with the precision of someone preparing for battle. "You look nice," I said as we headed to the car. "Special occasion?" "Just felt like dressing up," she replied. But I caught her checking her reflection in the side mirror. The restaurant was exactly as I'd expected from the website, dimly lit, upscale, with a prominent bar area visible from most tables. I'd specifically requested a table with a clear view of the bar when I changed our original booking. My wife didn't know I'd done that. We were seated quickly, and I made sure to position myself so I could watch her reactions throughout the evening. She seemed nervous, fidgeting with her napkin and glancing toward the bar every few minutes. "The bartender seems friendly," she mentioned casually after we'd ordered our appetizers. I followed her gaze to a guy in his late 20s, decent-looking, probably used to attention from female customers. "Does he?" I hadn't noticed. She shifted in her seat. "I think I'll get us some cocktails from the bar instead of waiting for the server." "Great idea. I'll have a whiskey neat." I watched her walk to the bar. Her posture suddenly different, more confident, more aware of herself. She positioned herself directly in front of the bartender, leaning slightly forward as she placed our order. The show had begun. From my table, I could see everything. She laughed too loudly at something he said while mixing drinks. When he handed her the first cocktail, she deliberately let their fingers touch. She asked him about the ingredients in my whiskey, a question she'd never cared about before, just to keep the conversation going. The bartender was eating it up, of course. He probably got this treatment from married women more often than he'd care to admit. When she returned to our table with the drinks, she was practically glowing. "He's really knowledgeable about spirits," she said, setting my whiskey down. "Did you know they age this particular brand in oak barrels for 12 years? "Fascinating," I replied, taking a sip. "Though I'm curious, since when are you interested in whiskey aging processes?" Her smile faltered for just a moment. "I just thought it was interesting." "It is. Though I have to say, you seemed very engaged in that conversation. The poor guy probably thought you were genuinely fascinated by his bartending expertise." She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "What do you mean?" "Well, the way you were leaning in, laughing at everything he said, asking follow-up questions about whiskey when you usually drink wine, it might give someone the wrong impression. I was just being friendly." "Of course you were." I raised my glass in a mock toast to friendly conversations with handsome bartenders. She stared at me, confusion written all over her face. This wasn't the reaction she'd anticipated. Her friends had prepared her for jealousy or obliviousness, not calm observation with a hint of amusement. "You're not bothered by it?" "Should I be? You ordered drinks and chatted with the bartender. That's what people do at bars." I took another sip of whiskey. "Though I have to say, your technique could use some work." "My technique?" The hair flip was a bit obvious. "And touching his hand when he gave you the drink?" "Textbook flirting 101. If you're going to test boundaries, you might want to be more subtle about it." The color drained from her face. "Test boundaries? What are you talking about?" "Nothing at all. I'm just saying that if someone were trying to flirt with a bartender to get a reaction from their husband, they might want to be less transparent about it." I smiled at her shocked expression. "But since you were just being friendly, my observation doesn't apply." She opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling with how to respond. Our appetizers arrived, giving her a moment to recover, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She'd expected either an explosion of jealousy or complete ignorance. Instead, she got analysis and mild entertainment. "How did you?" she started, then stopped herself. "How did I what?" "Nothing." "Never mind." We ate in relative silence for a few minutes. I could practically feel her frustration building. Her grand test was falling apart, and she didn't know how to salvage it. "I think I'll get another drink," she announced, standing up abruptly. "Excellent idea. While you're there, ask him about the wine selection. I bet he has some fascinating insights about vintage years and grape varieties." She shot me a look that could have melted steel, but walked back to the bar anyway. This time, her approach was different, more aggressive. She positioned herself even closer to the bartender, touched his arm while talking, and threw her head back when laughing. It was almost painful to watch. The bartender was clearly enjoying the attention, but even he seemed slightly uncomfortable with how forward she was being. Other customers were starting to notice. When she returned with her second cocktail, she looked expectant, like she was waiting for me to finally react the way her friends had predicted. "Feel better?" I asked. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You seemed tense after the first trip to the bar." I thought maybe another conversation with our friendly bartender might help you relax. She slammed her drink down harder than necessary. Why aren't you reacting normally? How should I be reacting? Like a husband whose wife just flirted with another man right in front of him. The words were out before she could stop them. The admission hung in the air between us like a confession. I set down my fork and looked at her calmly. So, you were flirting with him? That's not what I meant. But it's what you said. And it's what you did. I leaned back in my chair. The question is why you thought flirting with another man in front of your husband was a good idea. She looked panicked now, realizing she'd revealed her hand too early. It wasn't serious. It was just what? A test? An experiment? Something your friends suggested would be fun? Her face went white. How do you know about that? I smiled and signaled the waiter for the check. Lucky guess. The car ride home was tense. She kept glancing at me, trying to gauge how much I actually knew. I let her stew in the uncertainty, focusing on driving while she fidgeted with her purse strap. We should talk about what happened tonight, she finally said as we pulled into our driveway. Should we? I thought it was just friendly conversation with a bartender. She flinched. You know it was more than that. Do I? Because a few hours ago you insisted you were just being friendly. Now you're admitting it was something else. Which version should I believe? We walked into the house in silence. She headed straight for the kitchen, probably hoping to create some distance while she figured out her next move. I followed her, leaning against the doorframe as she busied herself with unnecessary tasks, wiping down counters that were already clean, rearranging items that didn't need rearranging. My friends think she started, then stopped. Your friends think what? That marriages need testing sometimes to make sure they're solid. And you agreed with them. It's not that simple. Actually, it is that simple. You either trust your marriage or you don't. You either respect your husband or you don't. I straightened up. Tonight you showed me exactly where you stand on both counts. She turned to face me, her expression defiant. So what happens now? Now? Now we see how committed you are to this little experiment of yours. The confusion in her eyes was almost comical. What do you mean? Well, tonight was clearly just the opening act. Your friends didn't dare you to flirt with one bartender and call it quits. There's more planned, isn't there? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. My guess. Next week, something bigger. Maybe a colleague at that office party you mentioned, or perhaps that neighbor who's been overly friendly during his evening walks. Her face went pale. I'd hit closer to home than she expected. The neighbor it is. I nodded as if she'd confirmed it. Interesting choice. Very convenient, very public. Your friends probably love the drama potential. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, she said, her voice rising. They keep saying that if I don't test these boundaries, I'll never know if our marriage is real or just comfortable routine. And what do you think? I think she paused, clearly struggling. I think maybe they have a point. There it was. The truth she'd been dancing around all evening. So you genuinely believe our marriage needs testing, don't you? Don't you ever wonder if we're just going through the motions? I studied her face, seeing a stranger where my wife used to be. No, I don't wonder that because I'm not looking for reasons to justify disrespecting you. That's not what this is about, isn't it? You're flirting with other men to test my reactions. You're taking relationship advice from friends who apparently think marriage is some kind of game. You're prioritizing their entertainment over our trust. I shook my head. That sounds exactly like disrespect to me. She crossed her arms defensively. Maybe you're just scared of what the test might reveal. What it might reveal? I almost laughed. I already know what it's revealed. That you're easily influenced by people who don't have your best interests at heart. That you're willing to risk our relationship for the approval of friends who see your marriage as their personal soap opera. And that you've confused drama with depth. She stared at me, anger flashing in her eyes. You think you're so smart, don't you? Smart enough to recognize manipulation when I see it. Your friends didn't dare you to test our marriage. They dared you to create problems in it. There's a difference. Maybe our marriage needs problems to grow stronger. Or maybe it needs a wife who doesn't look for excuses to flirt with other men. The words hung between us like a challenge. She looked like she wanted to argue further, but seemed to realize she didn't have solid ground to stand on. The office party is Friday, she said quietly. I figured as much. Are you going to try to stop me? I almost laughed. Stop you? Why would I stop you? You're an adult making adult choices. I'm just going to watch and learn. Learn what? Learn exactly who I married. She opened her mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. I had work to do before Friday, preparations to make. If she wanted to escalate this test, I'd make sure she understood exactly what she was testing. Thursday passed in a strange atmosphere of polite distance. She went about her normal routine, but I could feel her watching me, trying to read my mood. I remained pleasant but detached, like someone observing an interesting social experiment. Thursday evening, she spent 2 hours on the phone with her friends, speaking in hushed tones behind our closed bedroom door. I didn't bother trying to listen. I already knew what they were planning. Friday morning, she dressed for work with extra care. The outfit was professional but flattering, the makeup more precise than usual. She was preparing for battle again. The office party starts at 6, she mentioned over breakfast. I remember. Should be fun. You're still planning to come? Wouldn't miss it for the world. Something in my tone made her pause, coffee cup halfway to her lips. You're acting strange. Am the first? How should I be acting? I don't know. More concerned, maybe. More jealous about what? Your work party? Why would I be jealous of your colleagues? She set down her cup. Because of what might happen there. What might happen? Are you planning something special? The direct question caught her off guard. She'd been expecting me to dance around the subject, to pretend ignorance or explode with accusations. Instead, I was asking for specifics. I might talk to people, she said carefully. You usually do at parties. That's generally how social events work. I might talk to men. Your office has male employees. I'd be surprised if you avoided them entirely. Her frustration was building again. You know what I mean. Do I? Because you keep speaking in vague hints instead of saying what you actually plan to do. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. I'm going to be late for work. Have a great day. I'll see you at 6. As she headed for the door, I called after her. Oh, and honey, when you talk to your friends today, remind them that every test has the potential for unexpected results. She froze at the door, hand on the handle. What's that supposed to mean? Just that sometimes the person being tested isn't the one who fails. I heard the front door close a little harder than necessary. Phase 2 of their experiment was about to begin, but they still had no idea that I'd been running my own test all along. The office party was in full swing when I arrived at 6:15. I had deliberately shown up a few minutes late, giving my wife time to settle into whatever performance she'd planned. The venue was a trendy downtown space her company had rented, complete with an open bar and enough ambient lighting to make everyone feel sophisticated. I spotted her immediately. She was standing near the bar, of course, talking animatedly with a man I recognized as her colleague from the marketing department. He was leaning in close, clearly enjoying her attention while she gestured expressively with her wine glass. I grabbed a beer from the bar and positioned myself where I could observe without being obvious about it. Other colleagues came up to chat, and I made pleasant conversation while keeping one eye on my wife's show. She was good at this, I had to admit. The touches were subtle, a hand on his arm during conversation, a laugh that lasted just a beat too long, positioning herself so she had to look up at him through her lashes. Classic moves, just like her friends had probably coached her. The colleague was eating it up. He kept finding reasons to move closer, bought her drink after drink, and had that slightly dazed expression men get when they think they're about to score with a married woman. After about 30 minutes of this performance, my wife glanced around the room until she spotted me. Our eyes met across the crowded space, and I raised my beer in a casual salute. She looked surprised that I seemed so relaxed. That's when I decided to join the conversation. Having fun? I asked, walking up behind them with a smile. My wife startled slightly. Oh, hi. I was just talking to Mike about the new marketing campaign. Mike extended his hand with the overly confident grip of someone who thought he was winning. You must be the husband. Heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope. I shook his hand, applying just enough pressure to make him uncomfortable, though I have to say, based on your body language, you seem more interested in my wife than her marketing insights. Mike's smile faltered. What? No, we were just talking about work. Were you? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were trying very hard to impress her. The constant touching, the intense eye contact, buying her multiple drinks, classic pickup behavior. My wife's face went red. We were just having a conversation. Of course you were. But Mike here seems to think it was something more. Don't you, Mike? Mike looked between us, suddenly realizing he might have misread the situation entirely. I was just being friendly. Friendly? I nodded thoughtfully. Interesting definition. Tell me, Mike, do you touch all your married female colleagues the way you've been touching my wife tonight? I wasn't touching her inappropriately. Define inappropriate, because I counted at least 6 times you touched her arm, twice you touched her back, and once you tucked her hair behind her ear. That seems pretty inappropriate for a work conversation. The small crowd that had gathered around us was now listening intently. My wife looked mortified, but I wasn't done. Here's what I find fascinating, I continued, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby colleagues. My wife is apparently so starved for attention that she encourages this behavior from CO workers. And you, Mike, are apparently so desperate that you think a married woman flirting with you means you have a chance. Mike's face was turning red. Look, man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Let me clear it up for you. My wife has been testing our marriage by flirting with men to see how I'd react. You were tonight's unwitting participant in her little experiment. Congratulations, you've been used. The silence that followed was deafening. My wife looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor, and Mike was staring at her with a mixture of confusion and anger. Is that true? Mike asked her directly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Cat got your tongue? I asked her. This is the part where you explain to Mike how your friends dared you to flirt with men to test our marriage, how you've been treating our relationship like some kind of social media challenge. It's not that simple, she finally managed. Actually, it is that simple. You played games with our marriage, and Mike here was your unwitting chess piece. The question is, how many other colleagues have you involved in this little experiment? More people were gathering now, drawn by the tension. I recognized several faces from her previous office parties, all watching with the fascination people have for public relationship drama. Maybe we should discuss this privately, my wife whispered. Why? You weren't discussing our marriage privately with Mike. Seems fair that we finish the conversation the same way. Mike stepped back, clearly wanting to escape the situation. I'm going to go get another drink. Good idea, Mike. Maybe next time check if a woman is actually interested in you or just using you for entertainment. As Mike walked away, my wife grabbed my arm. Can we please go home already? But the party just started getting interesting. I thought you were enjoying yourself. Everyone's staring. Are they? Well, that tends to happen when you turn your marriage into a public spectacle. I looked around at the watching faces. Don't mind us, folks. Just a little marital honesty. Carry on with your evening. Some people drifted away, but others remained, clearly hoping for more drama. I want to leave, my wife said urgently. I bet you do. But first, let's address something. Your friends, where are they tonight? What friends? The ones who dared you to do this. The ones who convinced you that flirting with other men was a good test for our marriage. Are they here to watch their handiwork? They're not here. Of course they're not. They sent you to do their dirty work while they stayed safely at home, probably waiting for you to call with a full report. How convenient for them. She was trembling now. Whether from anger or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. You've made your point, she said through gritted teeth. Have I? Because I'm not sure you understand what just happened here. You didn't just embarrass yourself tonight, you embarrassed Mike. You embarrassed me, and you damaged your professional reputation. All for what? A dare from friends who won't face any consequences for their advice. The remaining onlookers were getting uncomfortable with the intensity of the conversation, but I wasn't finished. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice calm but carrying clearly through the space. We're going home. You're going to call your friends and tell them exactly how their little test worked out. Then we're going to have a very serious conversation about whether you want to be married to me or to their opinions. I finished my beer and set the empty bottle on a nearby table. Oh, and one more thing. If there's supposed to be a third test, you might want to reconsider because I guarantee you won't like how I handle the next one. With that, I walked toward the exit, leaving her to follow. Behind us, I could hear the murmur of conversations resuming, undoubtedly dissecting what they had just witnessed. In the parking lot, she finally found her voice. How could you humiliate me like that? I stopped walking and turned to face her. How could I humiliate you? I simply told the truth about what you were doing. If you're humiliated, it's because your behavior was humiliating. You didn't have to do it in front of everyone. You didn't have to flirt with your colleague in front of everyone either. But you chose to make this public, so I responded publicly. She stood there in the parking lot, her carefully planned evening in ruins, finally beginning to understand that her little game had consequences she hadn't anticipated. The second test was over, and judging by her expression, she was starting to realize she might not want to know the results. The house felt different when we walked through the front door. The same furniture, the same pictures on the walls, but the atmosphere had shifted completely. She went straight to the kitchen, probably hoping to busy herself with anything to avoid a conversation we both knew was coming. I followed her, watching as she opened the refrigerator and stared at its contents without actually seeing them. "Call them," I said simply. "Call who?" "Your friends, the masterminds behind this brilliant relationship test. Call them and tell them how it went." She closed the refrigerator door. "I don't want to talk to them right now." "I'm sure you don't, but they're probably waiting by their phones, eager to hear about your performance tonight. Don't keep them in suspense. Why are you doing this?" "Because I want them to hear exactly what their advice cost you. Your professional reputation, your dignity, and quite possibly your marriage." She leaned against the counter, looking defeated. "It wasn't supposed to go like this." "How was it supposed to go? I react with jealous rage and prove I'm possessive, or I ignore it completely and prove I don't care. Either way, you win and get to feel validated by your friends. They said it would help us grow stronger as a couple. By lying to each other, by playing games instead of communicating, that's their definition of growth?" Her phone buzzed text message, then another, then a third. "Let me guess they're checking in on tonight's results." She glanced at her phone and nodded reluctantly. "Perfect. Answer them, but put it on speaker. I want to hear their reaction to the truth." "I can't do that." "You can, and you will. Or I'll call them myself and give them my version of events." With shaking hands, she dialed the first number. The phone rang twice before her friend's excited voice filled the kitchen. "So, how did it go? Did he notice? Did he get jealous?" My wife looked at me, panic in her eyes. I gestured for her to continue. "He noticed," she said quietly. "And? Don't leave us hanging. What happened?" "He confronted Mike in front of everyone at the party." Silence on the other end. "Then wait. What do you mean confronted?" "He called out the flirting publicly. He told Mike about the dare, about the test. He humiliated both of us in front of my colleagues." "Oh my God, that wasn't supposed to happen." I stepped closer to the phone. "Hi there. This is the husband who wasn't supposed to figure out your little game." The sharp intake of breath was audible. "Who is this?" "The man whose marriage you've been using as entertainment. The one you convinced my wife to play relationship roulette with using her professional reputation and our trust as chips. This is between you and your wife. Is it? Because you're the ones who dared her to flirt with other men. You're the ones who convinced her that testing boundaries was healthy. You created this situation, so you get to hear how it ends. We were just trying to help." "Help? You helped her embarrass herself at her workplace. You helped damage her credibility with colleagues. You helped create a situation where she had to choose between defending her marriage or pleasing you." My wife was staring at me, tears forming in her eyes. "We didn't know he would react like that," the friend said defensively. "You didn't think at all. You treated someone else's marriage like your personal soap opera, and now you're abandoning her to deal with the consequences alone. We never told her to." "To what? To follow through on your dare? To test her marriage?" "That's exactly what you told her to do." The line went quiet for a long moment. "Maybe you should talk to your wife about this privately," the friend finally said. "Maybe you should think twice before giving relationship advice that destroys relationships." I ended the call and looked at my wife, who was now crying openly. "They hung up on you, didn't they?" I asked gently. She nodded, unable to speak. "Of course they did. Because they got their entertainment, and now they don't want to deal with the cleanup." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For which part? The flirting, the lying, the public humiliation, or for prioritizing their opinions over our marriage?" "All of it." "I'm sorry for all of it." I studied her face, seeing genuine regret but also the dawning realization of what she'd risked. "Sorry isn't enough anymore," I said quietly. "Sorry doesn't undo what happened tonight. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust that's been deliberately broken." "What does that mean for us?" "It means you have a choice to make. You can continue letting other people dictate how you treat your marriage, or you can decide that our relationship is worth more than their entertainment. I choose us." "Do you? Because this was just test number 2. Your friends probably have more brilliant ideas lined up, more ways to test and probe and experiment with our relationship. There won't be a third test. There won't be a third test because I won't be here for it." The words hung in the air between us, final, definitive. "You mean that?" "I mean that. I won't be married to someone who treats our relationship like a game. I won't compete with your friends for influence over my own wife. She was sobbing now, the full weight of her choices finally hitting her. What do I need to do? You need to decide who you're married to, me or them. 3 weeks later, our house felt like home again, not because everything had magically returned to normal, but because we'd finally established what normal actually meant. My wife had made her choice that night in the kitchen. She'd called her friends the next morning and told them she wouldn't be participating in any more relationship experiments. The conversation hadn't gone well. They'd accused her of being controlled, of losing her independence, of choosing a possessive husband over supportive friends. She'd listened to their arguments and then quietly told them that real friends wouldn't have put her marriage at risk for their entertainment. That had ended several friendships, but it had saved our marriage. The changes weren't just about cutting off toxic influences. She'd also had to rebuild trust at work after the office party incident became office gossip. Mike had apparently told everyone who'd listen about being used as a pawn in a marital test, and her professional reputation had taken a hit. But she'd handled it with more maturity than I'd expected. Instead of making excuses or blaming others, she'd owned the situation, apologized to Mike directly, explained her poor judgment to her supervisor, and focused on proving her professionalism through her work rather than her words. I got the promotion, she announced one evening, coming home with a smile I hadn't seen in months. The senior marketing position. They said my recent work has been exceptional. Apparently focusing on actual job performance instead of office drama pays off. I hugged her, genuinely proud. Congratulations. You earned it. I almost threw it all away for a stupid dare. But you didn't. You recognized the problem and fixed it. She'd also started seeing a counselor not because I demanded it, but because she'd realized she needed help understanding why she'd been so easily manipulated by her friends. The sessions had revealed some uncomfortable truths about her need for approval and her fear of confrontation. My therapist says I was using their validation to avoid dealing with my own insecurities, she told me one night as we cooked dinner together. What kind of insecurities? About whether I was interesting enough, desirable enough, worth fighting for. Instead of talking to you about those feelings, I let them convince me that testing you was the answer. And now? Now I know that a man who truly loves you doesn't need to be tested. He shows up every day and proves it through his actions. The most significant change was in how we communicated. We'd started having weekly check-ins about our relationship, not dramatic heart-to-hearts, but honest conversations about what was working and what wasn't. Do you ever regret not walking away that night? She asked during one of these talks. No. But I would have, if you'd chosen differently. I know. That's what scared me into making the right choice. Marriage shouldn't be so comfortable that you can take it for granted. But it also shouldn't be so fragile that it needs constant testing. Exactly. We'd found our balance. I'd learned to be more vocal about my feelings instead of assuming she should just know. She'd learned to bring concerns to me instead of seeking outside validation. Most importantly, we both learned that respect isn't negotiable. Her former friends had tried to reach out a few times, claiming they missed her and wanted to reconcile. She politely declined each attempt. Do you miss them? I asked after the latest invitation to coffee. I miss the good parts of those friendships, but I don't miss feeling like I had to prove myself to them constantly. You never had to prove yourself to them. I know that now. Real friends don't dare you to risk your marriage for their entertainment. 6 months after the failed tests, we were stronger than we'd been in years, not because we'd overcome some dramatic crisis, but because we'd finally learned to prioritize each other over outside opinions. The marriage test had failed spectacularly, not because our relationship was weak, but because the test itself was fundamentally flawed. You don't strengthen a marriage by introducing doubt and deception. You strengthen it by choosing each other consistently, especially when other people try to convince you to choose something else. My wife had learned that lesson the hard way, but she learned it completely. And her former friends were probably still looking for their next source of relationship drama, having learned nothing at all.